To be a happy and successful language learner, make peace with your inner horse. If you wish you were better at learning languages, if you're frustrated with how hard it is to understand grammar, if you're saying to yourself, why can't I remember that word? I've looked at it 1,000,000 times. If you wish you were more like a computer or a robot so you could just learn this language already, then you need to make peace with your inner horse. In this video, we're going to take a look inside ourselves and meet our inner horse. What is our inner horse? What does it have to do with language learning? How can we make peace with it? And once we do, how will this help us to ride our inner horse to success and enjoy the journey along the way? I promise it will all make sense by the end. Welcome to my channel. I am Jan Telekoman, also known as Joel. I'm a translator, and here I like to share my passion for second language acquisition. I like to share things that have helped me along the way, and I hope they'll be helpful to you too. So firstly, what is our inner horse? Well, inside ourselves, it's like there are two entities, the rider and the horse. Now, this analogy isn't mine by any means. It goes all the way back to ancient times. And it's used in different ways. When I talk about the inner horse, what I'm talking about is the unconscious part of our mind. So the conscious part is the rider, and the unconscious part is the horse. Imagine, if you will, a horse and rider at full gallop, like a charging knight. From a distance, they look like a single harmonious whole, but in fact they are two entities, a horse and a rider. In the same way, right now you're watching me and you see a single entity, but in fact there are two entities inside me. There's the conscious part of me that's talking to you and thinks it knows what it's doing, and there's the unconscious part of me that's making everything possible and is cooperating with me to do what I want to do, or at least it does most of the time. So now we come to the idea of the harmony between the horse and the rider. Because, of course, from a distance it looks effortless, but in fact, moment to moment, the horse is making a decision to obey the rider. And it could decide not to. If it gets tired, its responses will slow down. If it's scared, the rider will pull on the reins to make it go forward, but the horse might turn back. If the horse is angry with the rider, then it can just refuse to obey, or even take over and go wild. So the rider has to understand the horse and work with it to go where they want to go. And it's similar with us. Our mind, our conscious mind, decides it wants to do something, and usually our unconscious mind in our body follows, but it doesn't always work out like that. So I'll tell you a funny story. There was a time when I got very stressed about something, and I had a migraine for the first time ever, and this was a migraine with aura. And the aura I had was that I couldn't make the sounds I wanted with my mouth. I would try to read something off a page. In my head I could hear the sounds I wanted to make, but it was like random sounds were coming out of my mouth. So it was funny. It was scary at the same time, but it was funny. So of course that's an extreme example, but it's an example of how we rely on the harmony between mind and body, or the conscious and unconscious parts of our mind, and it doesn't always work out. If we get too tired, sometimes our responses slow down. Maybe we decide to do something, but then later on we get there and we just don't have the motivation anymore. We just don't feel like doing it. Sometimes we can get nervous. Let's say we need to get up in a room and address a crowd of people. We might know what we want to say and have decided what we want to say ahead of time, but then we get there, we stand up, and everybody's looking at us, and we shy away from it, just like a frightened horse. Especially if we've been treated badly, or we don't treat ourselves properly, then we can lose control. If we get too hungry, angry, lonely or tired, then we can end up making decisions that we later regret. So the point is that to achieve what we want to achieve, we need to understand our own needs and treat ourselves properly. We are more than just our conscious mind. To get to where we want to go, we have to make peace with our inner horse. We need to be in harmony with the unconscious part of ourselves so we can achieve what we want to achieve. So if we go with this analogy, what does the inner horse have to do with language learning? Where is language inside ourselves? Is it part of the rider or is it part of the horse? Well, the answer is it's a bit of both. I want to share with you an interesting idea from a second language acquisition researcher by the name of Jackendoff. And he's an interesting guy because his PhD advisor was Chomsky, and he is still definitely a generativist in the generativist tradition. But what he's been working on recently is trying to make a grand harmony with cognitive linguistics, and his ideas are all about bottom-up structures and schema, which are very similar to what I've been talking about on this channel. So he's a very interesting guy. The point is he's got street cred. So here's the idea, the unconscious meaning hypothesis. As I've said before, language is basically forms and meaning. Meaning, the things we want to express, and the forms we use to express them, the words if you like. The unconscious meaning hypothesis says that the forms are accessible consciously, we use the forms, and we definitely feel like they have meaning, but the actual meaning itself is in our unconscious. That's the idea. In his 2015 book, A User's Guide to Thought and Meaning, he puts it like this: the meaning side of a sound-meaning pair is unconscious, except for producing the feeling that the attached piece of sound is meaningful. There's a blog post that explains more that I'll share in the description. But basically, Jackendoff is saying we grasp words, we can manipulate and recombine these words, but exactly what makes the words meaningful is in our unconscious. So it made me think of an analogy. So words are a bit like a suitcase. The handle part of it is in our conscious mind. We can grab it. We can grab the handle, we can move the suitcase around, we can even stack the suitcases in different ways. But exactly what makes the word meaningful, the suitcase part of it, is invisible to us. It's in our subconscious, in the unconscious part of our mind. So now what happens if we plug this into the horse and rider analogy? What does that mean? It means that the rider has the word itself, has the form, has the handle of the suitcase, but the suitcase itself, the actual meaning of the word, is part of the horse. I mean, I think that's a bit mind-blowing. I don't know about you. We don't need to go down the rabbit hole right now, of course, but if we think about it, it does kind of make sense, because there is clearly a mysterious dimension to words that we're not fully aware of. Words evoke feelings in us. And when somebody who's learning our native language makes a mistake, we know it's a mistake, but we can't quite tell them why it's a mistake. We just know it is. We just have this intuition that's part of us. It's like that line in Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Well, yes, of course, a rose could have been called anything, but that word rose evokes something in us. Why should rose have that special power when it's just a seemingly random noise? So the bottom line is, language is not part of the rider, it's actually part of the horse. The rider uses language, manipulates language, grabs onto the handles of the suitcases, but the language itself is part of the horse, it's part of our unconscious mind. This gives us another way of thinking about the learning acquisition distinction. As you may be aware, Krashen is particularly well known for talking about the learning acquisition distinction, but it is more or less a consensus among second language acquisition researchers that there is a distinction to be made, whether you call it learning acquisition, implicit explicit, declarative procedural. There is certainly a distinction along those lines. So how can we talk about the learning acquisition distinction in terms of the horse and the rider? Well, language learning is all in the rider. It's all about conscious knowledge and deliberate analysis. But language acquisition is the unconscious meanings we were talking about. It's part of the horse, it's rooted in the horse. And this, of course, helps to explain why comprehensible input, or communicatively embedded input, as some like to say, is absolutely essential to language acquisition, because you can't teach a horse something by explaining something to it. A horse learns from experience, and that's what comprehensible input is. Just theoretical knowledge about language is part of the rider. But the horse is a horse. It needs real life experience of the language being used in a meaningful way to express real thoughts and real intentions. So, if you're anything like me, this whole idea of having to deal with a part of yourself that's like a horse to learn language is deeply unappealing. But why is that? Why is it so hard to make peace with our inner horse? Well, I think there are two dimensions to this. Firstly, the education system has baked into it some very misleading assumptions about what language is. We're made to think that we shouldn't need the unconscious part of ourselves, the horse, at all. And secondly, culturally, there can be some very unhealthy attitudes about that unconscious part of ourselves in general. So firstly, the education system. Language is taught as just another lesson, as just another subject like maths or science. And so everybody's got this idea that learning a language is like solving equations or mastering knowledge about a subject. It's all in the head, it's all about the rider. But if there's one thing that language acquisition research has shown us in the past 50 years, it's that language acquisition happens mostly unconsciously, and we've just talked about that. But even if we understand all that on some level, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about your inner horse? After talking about it for some minutes, how do you feel about the idea that your body, your unconscious mind is not a car, it's not a robot, it's a living creature with needs and feelings? Doesn't feel great, does it? But maybe here's the question we should be asking. Who told us that it's better to be like a machine? Have we been watching too much Star Trek? Have we fallen in love with the emotionless Vulcans? Have we been influenced by platonic ideals of perfection? Do we think that there's one absolutely perfect way to be and anything else is somehow ugly? Do we maybe spend a lot of time thinking about the struggle for survival, nature red in tooth and claw, amidst a vast, cold, unfeeling universe where might is right? Do we tend to see the world through that lens, perhaps? Or was it your parents or your teachers who always expected more from you? Were you never quite good enough for them? Did you feel like you lost something because of being a child? Was it a bad thing to be silly sometimes? Was it just a risk not worth taking to allow yourself to make mistakes? Of course, these are very deep questions and they go far beyond language learning. But if you're a bit of a perfectionist, if you feel like you must take control, otherwise bad things will happen, well, you're not alone. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to language, there's just no way around it. In other areas of your life, you might be able to analyze and rationalize and ignore the horse and just solve everything in your head. But language acquisition is all about the horse. There's just no way around it. It's not a robot, it's not a car, it's a horse. It's alive, it has needs, it has feelings, it has good days and bad days. You can't see inside it, you can never fully control it, you're never going to fully understand it. It's smelly, it's messy, it's a lot of work. But have you ever seen a herd of horses at full gallop? They're amazing, powerful, magnificent creatures. And so are you. You're a human. You're only human. You're no superhero. But when humans get going, they're amazing. You're amazing. So if there's anybody that's making you feel inadequate because you are only human, because you're not a robot, because you're riding a horse and not driving a car, well, really, they're the ones who need to take a look in the mirror. If they're in denial, let them be in denial. You are what you are. So if you're not free to say it out loud, then at least in your mind, tell them to shove off. So, it's a horse, and hopefully by now we've learned to love it a little. And it will love us back. If we give it what it needs and be patient, then it will be happy to take us where we want to go. And what do we need to feed our horse in order to acquire language? Well, you probably already know the answer to that. Comprehensible input. Comprehensible input sounds like such a fancy term, but really it's very simple. It's like saying digestible food. I mean, if a horse is nourished, then it must certainly be eating digestible food, even though that's not what we call it. We call it horse feed or whatever. And similarly, your brain uses comprehensible input to acquire language. Now, a lot of people have the wrong idea about what comprehensible input is, so let's get it straight. Comprehensible input means the language is being used around you, and you can work out the meanings that people are trying to express. So you don't have to micromanage it. You don't have to know exactly what each word is doing in the sentence for it to work. Your brain is amazing. It works it all out. The important thing is that you can work out what's going on. You can work out what people are trying to say, the ideas that they have, the feelings they're trying to express, and that at the same time you can hear the sounds they're making with their mouths. So your brain, the horse, just eats all that up like hay. And as we all know, horses eat a lot. And when you start to feed your horse properly, you're not going to notice a difference in the first day or two, or even maybe a week or two. And you certainly can't see what's happening in its digestive system. But the important thing is to keep feeding it the right feed. It's the same with comprehensible input. If you don't believe me, try it. Try it. You can try it on yourself for free. You can go watch comprehensible input channels like Dreaming Spanish, or you can try my video series, Opilina Tokipona, to experience the process in the shortest time possible with the tiniest language possible. So the important thing is, don't micromanage the process. Don't get fixated on individual words. Don't worry about consciously following what each word is doing in the sentence. Don't worry about testing yourself to see if you can remember what that word was. See, that's the rider. That's the conscious part of you. Focus on feeding the horse part of you. Give it what it needs. Give it time. Love it a little, and it will surprise you. So to wrap it all up, what is your inner horse? Your inner horse is the unconscious part of your mind. Why is this important to know as a language learner? Because language isn't just a rider thing. The rider uses language, but language is actually part of the horse. So what do we need to do? Make peace with our inner horse. Love it a little. It's not a robot. It's not a car, but it's still a magnificent creature. So, treat it right, and it will love you back. And what's the horse feed we need to acquire language? Comprehensible input, also known as communicatively embedded input, or simply experiencing the language in a meaningful way. So, my friend, enough. Enough with the perfectionism and the micromanaging and mind over matter. You're human. You're only human, but that's enough. It's more than enough. All you need is nourishment, a bit of time, a bit of love. You got this.